Ako po si Michael Maurilio, si Alyas Rene. Una po sa lahat, hindi po ako binayaran, pinilit, tinakot or kinidnap ng kingdom o ang kampo ni Pastor Apollo si Kibuloy. Wala po akong katotohanan yung mga claims ni Senador Risa sa kanyang press con. Wala po ako sa pader ng kingdom. 2019 pa po ako huling nakapunta ng Glory Mountain. Ito lamang ay pamamaraan ni Senador Risa upang ako ay makuha ulit at patahimikin. Kusa po akong lumabas upang sabihin yung katotohanan. Handa po akong maglabas ng mga ebidensya, kaukulang ebidensya, papatunay na si Senador Risa ang pasimuno sa mga paninira kay Pastor Apollo Kibuloy. At handa po akong sa anumang mga legal na proseso.
So in other words po, yung ginawa ni Senator Risa Hontiveros is pwede po yun siya bumagsak dito under Article 17 Paragraph 2 as a principal by inducement in inducing that witness po in committing a perjurious or making a perjurious statement dun sa Senate hearing. Okay, so yun po yun. And again, kaya ina-explain ko po sa inyo tong term na principal kasi wala na po yung term nga na subornation of perjury dito sa RPC natin, sa Revised Penal Code. However, meron naman po tayong provisions regarding this, yung principal by inducement. Party involved po dito sa discussion natin is an elected officer, diba? Specifically a member of the Senate, a senator. So kung maging guilty po siya, mahatulan po siya ng guilty verdict, pwede po yan siya ngayon mahatulan ng perpetual absolute disqualification from holding any appointive or elective position in the government. Okay, so yan po yung mga liability in the crime of perjury.
Reaction of PH nagbabalik. Napakaganda ho ng pag-uusapan natin ngayon mga kapatid. Walang iba, ito nga pong si Alyas Rene kung saan rumibat na ako kaagad kay Senator Risa Kokak. Matapos nga ang press con nitong si Risa Kokak kahapon mga kapatid, agad namang bumwelta si Rene na di umano'y nanggigigil na sa mga kapatid. Ayaw niya na po talagang ginagamit daw siya nito si Risa Hontiveros. Pagod na raw siya sa pagsisinungaling ni Risa Hontiveros. Kaya mga kapatid, pakinggan ho natin ang magiging pahig niya patungkol dito.
Ako po si Michael Maurilio, si Alyas Rene. Una po sa lahat, hindi po ako binayaran, pinilit, tinakot or kinidnap ng kingdom o ang kampo ni Pastor Apollo si Kibuloy. Wala po akong katotohanan yung mga claims ni Senador Risa sa kanyang press con. Wala po ako sa pader ng kingdom. 2019 pa po ako huling nakapunta ng Glory Mountain. Ito lamang ay pamamaraan ni Senador Risa upang ako ay makuha ulit at patahimikin. Kusa po akong lumabas upang sabihin yung katotohanan. Handa po akong maglabas ng mga ebidensya, kaukulang ebidensya, papatunay na si Senador Risa ang pasimuno sa mga paninira kay Pastor Apollo Kibuloy. At handa po akong sa anumang mga legal na proseso. Senador Risa, hindi ako nag-text ng anuman sa'yo. Wag mo na akong gamitin sa mga kasinungalingan mo. Kaya nga nasusuka ako sa iyo. Titindigan ko yung mga sinabi ko sa video na ginawa ko.
Ayun na nga, putang ina talagang hayop na. Hello. Ayun na nga po mga kapit. Ayan na, Risa. Lalabas na itong si Alyas Rene at magpapakatotoo. Yan, lagot ka na. Ilalabas lahat ng mga ebidensya na ikaw ang pasimuno kay Pastor Kibuloy. Lagot ka. Diba? Magkakalabasan na. Lalabas na ang baho mo, Risa Kokak. Ngayon, etong star witness na sinasabi mo o yung ilabas mo na yung mga 13 na witness mo na sigurado namang kung hindi man magtugma-tugma o magtugma-tugma man yung mga yan, binayaran nyo na naman yan. Pero ito, hindi na masikmura mga kapit, hindi niya na humasikmura ang kasinungalingan na ginagawa niya na hindi niya na po kaya siraan si Pastor Kibuloy. Diba? Ngayon, ito na talaga ang pinakahihintay natin. Ang sumagot siya dito kay Risa Hontiveros at magpapatunay na siya talaga ang pinakautak. Diba? Pakinggan po natin mga kapit.
Kusang loob ko itong ginawa para matahimik na yung konsensya ko. Uulitin ko po, hindi po ako binayaran, pinilit, kinidnap ng kingdom o ang kampo ni Pastor Apollo Kibuloy.
Ayun, kaya pala mga ka-update eh. Sa bagay, naubos na kasi nga naman yung 1 milyon mga ka-update. Kaya tama lang na bumaliktad na ulit ito kay Risa Hontiveros mga ka-update. Siyempre, 1 milyon mga ka-update, hindi naman po madaling kitain yan o hindi naman madaling mahanap yan. Ngayon, nakapagsalita na nga itong si Alyas Rene at magpapatunay, mag-isipin niya nga po yun, haharap daw po siya at magpapakatunay o magpapakatotoo na walang katotohanan lahat ng mga ginawa nila Risa o puro script lang. Talagang gumawa lang silang daan para hulihin si Pastor Kibuloy. Mantagin po ninyo yun, ilang taon din siya nanerbisyo kay Pastor Kibuloy itong si Alyas Rene. Pero hindi naman talaga siya sinasaktan o inaapi. Sunod nito mga ka-update, pakinggan naman ho natin itong magiging pahayag ni Atty. Nil Abayon patungkol sa bayarang witness. Ito nga, si Risa Hontiveros. Ayan mo mga ka-update, pakinggan po natin.
So, ang papag-usapan po natin is ito po, itong issue na to kung saan nagkaroon ng, or may lalaki pong gumawa ng video ngayon na sabi niya siya daw yung witness dun sa isang Senate hearing ni Senator Risa Hontiveros. Tapos sabi niya, binayaran lang daw po siya ni Senator Risa. Kaya nasabi niya yung mga sinabi niya against Pastor Kibuloy dito sa Senate hearing ni Senator Risa Hontiveros. Okay, pero tandaan po ninyo hindi ko po sinasabing binayaran talaga siya ni Senator Risa. Hindi ko rin po sinabing guilty si Senator Risa. I will be simply explaining today kung ano yung mga possible criminal violations or criminal liabilities po sa ganitong situation. In other words, this is simply for legal educational purposes. Okay? Today's discussion po, we will have 3 main questions. So yung pinakauna po of course para magets nyo talaga is kung ano ba talaga yung krimen na perjury. So for that po, titingnan natin kung ano ba yung nakalagay sa revised penal code. Okay? So yung batas po natin na most recent amendment po sa perjury laws natin is Republic Act 11594, October 29, 2021. So in this law po basically tinaasan yung penalty ng perjury. Okay? So explain ko lang din po pala muna itong amendatory law na to kasi baka maguluhan po kayo So yung crime po of perjury, of course, mahanap po natin yan sa revised penal code. However, kung kailangan po i-amend yung provisions ng revised penal code, kailangan po ngayon mag-create or magkaroon ng amendatory law. So in this case po, for the crime of perjury, yun po yung Republic Act 11594. Okay, ina-explain ko lang po to kasi baka magtaka kayo bakit ito yung sinasite ko, hindi revised penal code. So in summary po, yung pinaka-point ng batas nito, yung section 1 nito ngayon, kung makita nyo, gusto palitan nitong 11594 na itong sinulat nila dito, ito pong highlight ko, ito na yung ilipat or isulat na ngayon sa revised penal code because of this amendatory law. Okay, so in other words, Article 183 of the revised penal code will be amended according to this. So yung pinaka-important po nating iti-take note dito is yung penalties. Okay, pero bago ko po pala explain yung penalties, explain ko muna sa inyo kung ano ba talaga yung crimen of perjury. So Article 183 po yan of the revised penal code, false testimony in other cases and perjury in solemn affirmation. So hindi ko na po ito babasahin verbatim tong paragraph. I will just summarize it and feel free to read it na lang po kung gusto ninyo. In summary po, the crime of perjury is making false statements po or pagsisinungaling po ninyo while you are under oath habang nanumpa po kayo. Okay? So dito po kasi sa discussion natin, yung mga allegations dito, isabi nung witness, binayaran daw siya ni Senator Risa kaya nagsinungaling daw siya dun sa Senate hearing niya. E diba tatandaan po natin in a Senate hearing, diba yung mga witnesses po doon, yung mga resource persons, pinapa-take oath po sila Therefore, pwede po yun pumasok ngayon for the crime of perjury kung totoong nagsinungaling talaga yung witness na yun. Okay, so that's the easiest way for me to explain the crime of perjury, ang pagsisinungaling po while you are under oath. Okay, so ganyan po yan. So dapat po maging honest talaga kayo. Kung nanumpa kayo, dapat wala kayong any false statements kasi you can be held liable for this crime. Tapos later po, explain ko sa inyo yung penalty. Ito, tingnan nyo, prison major in its minimum period. So medyo mabigat po yan. Pero anyway, mamaya na po natin explain yung possible penalties and potential liabilities po sa krimen na perjury. And then yung next question naman po natin for question number 2, pwede ba maging liable si Senator Risa hindi naman siya ang gumawa ng perjurious statement? Okay, so that is a very interesting question kasi kung tatandaan po ninyo, yung gumawa naman or nagsabi ng perjurious statement is yung witness, siya yung nagsinungaling So saan dun yung perjury sa side ni Senator Risa? Okay, so for that po ngayon, dito papasok yung binanggit dati ni FPRRD, yung subornation of perjury. Kung naalala po ba ninyo yung dati yung sa issue kay Colonel Grijaldo po ata yun, if I'm not mistaken, na sabi ni Colonel Grijaldo, pinilit daw siya ng mga congressman sa House of Representatives. So sabi ni FPRRD dun sa interview, that can be considered as subornation of perjury. Pero anyway, tuloy na po tayo sa discussion para hindi po tayo medyo humaba. Okay, so ngayon explain ko po sa inyo kung ano ba yung potential liability ng isang tao na nag-induce ng another person to commit the crime of perjury. Okay, so yung binanggit po ni FPRRD na subornation of perjury, dati po kasi meron tayong specific or special law for that na talagang nagse-specify or naglalagay doon ng term na subornation of perjury. However, dito po sa batas natin, sa current setup po ng criminal laws natin, wala na pong term na subornation of perjury. Kung pumunta po kayo doon sa Article 183, ito pong binanggit ko sa inyo kanina, 183, 184, so on and so forth regarding the provisions po regarding perjury sa atin. So current setup po natin, wala na pong term doon na subornation of perjury. However, sa setup po natin, meron naman pong tinatawag na principal by inducement. Ito po, number 2, those who directly force or induce others to commit it. Okay? So una-una po explain ko muna sa inyo ano ba talaga yung principal. Okay? So kung makikita po ninyo sa Article 16 of the Revised Penal Code, nakalagay po dito, who are criminally liable. The following are criminally liable for grave and less grave felonies. Number 1, principal. Okay? So yan na lang po explain ko. Hindi ko na ita-touch on yung accomplice and accessories kasi wala naman pong kinalaman na yan. Pero yung isa pa pong kailangan natin isagutin muna before we proceed is ito po, kasi nakalagay lang dito, criminally liable for grave and less grave felonies. So saan ba dyan babagsak yung crime of perjury? So yung grave felonies po, ito yung may mga capital penalty. Ito po yung life imprisonment, reclusion perpetua, reclusion temporal. Yung pinakita ko kanina, prison mayor, di ba? Paano papasok doon yung perjury? So dito po yan papasok yung perjury sa less grave felonies. So less grave felonies po, ito yung may mga correctional penalties pataas. So yung prison mayor po, basically it is in between the capital penalty and the correctional penalties po natin. Therefore, papasok po siya sa less grave felonies. Okay, so kung pasok po siya sa less grave felonies, papasok po to lahat ng mga terms na to ngayon. Pero anyway, yung important lang po sa atin is the term principal. So under Article 17 po, principals, the following are considered principals. There are multiple ways po kasi para maging principal kayo. Yung isa po dyan is those who directly force or induce others to commit it. Meaning, in-induce mo po or pinilit mo yung ibang tao na gumawa ng krimen. Okay? So, ito pong those who directly force or induce others to commit it. Ito rin po yung ginagamit nilang argument against FPRRD. Dun po sa yung sa drug war niya because daw of the reward system, yung quote-unquote reward system, although those are all allegations pa lang po, hindi pa naman established facts talaga, na dahil daw dun sa quote-unquote reward system, naging principal by inducement daw si FPRRD because yun nga, na-induce na yung mga police officers, yung mga vigilante groups to perform all those EJKs because of that reward system. Ina-explain ko lang din po yung side ni FPRRD para po mas ma-gets nyo talaga yung concept behind this, okay? So ngayon, ang sabi po dun ng witness sa video niya is pinilit daw siya or binayaran daw po siya ni Senator Risa Hontiveros. So that will fall under this one po, yung inducing others to commit it. So in other words po, yung ginawa ni Senator Risa Hontiveros is pwede po yun siya bumagsak dito under Article 17 paragraph 2 as a principal by inducement in inducing that witness po in committing a perjurious or making a perjurious statement dun sa Senate hearing. Okay, so yun po yun. And again, kaya ina-explain ko po sa inyo tong term na principal kasi wala na po yung term nga na subornation of perjury dito sa RPC natin, sa Revised Penal Code. However, meron naman po tayong provisions regarding this, yung principal by inducement. So kung makikita po nyo, pwede pa rin po kayo maging liable ng krimen assuming yung krimen na yon is a grave or less grave felony if you induced or forced another person to commit a crime. Hindi lang po yung direct participant or yung taong mismo gumawa ng krimen ang pwede maging liable. Pati po kayo kung pilitin ninyo or induce yung isang tao na gumawa ng krimen, you will be considered as a principal by inducement. Okay? And for our last question po, ano ang penalty ng ganitong kitmen? Okay, so i-correct po muna natin yan. Ano ang penalty So balik po tayo dito sa RA 11594, yung amendatory law po sa perjury. So makita po niyo nakalagay dito, the penalty of prison mayor in its minimum period shall be imposed upon any person who knowingly making untruthful statements and so on and so forth. Hindi ko na po babasahin. So prison mayor po basically, it is 6 years and 1 day po yung minimum penalty niyan. Okay? And ito pong prison mayor or yung 6 years and 1 day is important also to note considering si Senator Risa Hontiveros po kasi is a sitting senator, di ba? Therefore, she has what we call parliamentary immunity under the Constitution. So yung parliamentary immunity po under the Constitution, it is only limited up to 6 years. So hindi po pwede arestuhin ang member ng Congress or member ng Senate for a crime that has a penalty of up to 6 years. Okay? However, dito po, since prison mayor na yung penalty ngayon ng perjury because of this amendatory law, ang 6 years and 1 day po, hindi na covered or hindi na protected nung tinatawag na parliamentary immunity. So ang point ko lang po dito, let's say mag full-blown criminal case talaga sila, tapos let's say mahatulan ng guilty. Hindi ko po sinasabing guilty this is just for discussion purposes. So kung mahatulan po ng guilty dito, pwede po siyang maaresto kasi hindi po covered ng parliamentary immunity yung prison mayor na penalty. Okay? At yung isa pa pong kailangan natin i-take note din dito is this one po. So aside from imprisonment, meron din po yung fine also. So this one shall also suffer a fine not to exceed 1 million pesos. So yung 1 million pesos, I'm assuming hindi naman na yan ganun kabigat talaga, di ba, for mga people of influence. Okay? So ang next po natin kailangan i-take note is ito, and perpetual absolute disqualification from holding any appointive or elective position in the government or any agency, entity, or instrumentality thereof. Okay? So ito yung medyo big deal dito since yung party involved po dito sa discussion natin is an elected officer, di ba? Specifically a member of the Senate, a senator. So kung maging guilty po siya, mahatulan po siya ng guilty verdict, pwede po yan siya ngayon mahatulan ng perpetual absolute disqualification from holding any appointive or elective position in the government. Okay? So yan po yung mga liability in the crime of perjury. Okay? And klaruhin ko lang din po, baka magtaka kayo, hindi ba itong provision na to will apply only to the person who directly performed the perjurious statement? Okay? So hindi po yun siya limited dun sa author lang ng crime. This is also, or this will also apply po to the person who induced another to commit. In other words po, yung principal by inducement will have this penalty also. So anyway, hanggang dyan lang po yung discussion natin for today. If you like more
Ayun nga po mga ka-update. Pakikinggan naman po natin itong ating si Atty. Kokak kung saan bibisitahin naman po natin si Pangulong Duterte sa dahig. Yan mga kabita, simulan na rin po natin.
Attorney Kaufman, good morning. How are you today?
I'm well. Had a bit of a break, 2 weeks away, but I'm fine.
How is our beloved former president Rodrigo Roa Duterte, sir?
Well, I've just come out from seeing him. He's in good spirits as usual.
Sir, I have a series of questions. My first one is that the ICC plenary unanimously rejected former President Duterte's request to disqualify 2 judges. What is your reaction to this decision, sir?
I trust the judges, and I trust the judges took the decision that they took for the right reasons. I have no reason to doubt them. Furthermore, new information has come to light, which I'm not at liberty to disclose, but it would have made a difference had I known about it before I made the request to disqualify the judges.
Okay. Sir, what does this outcome suggest about the ICC's impartiality and the integrity of its judicial process, especially in politically sensitive cases like this?
I'm not going to impugn the impartiality or the partiality of the International Criminal Court. As far as I'm concerned, the judges are doing their job as they're expected to do, given their mandate under the Rome Statute. I have no reason whatsoever to doubt their integrity.
Sir, if the investigation proceeds and leads to prosecution, what legal consequences could President Duterte realistically face under international law?
Well, I'm hoping that this case won't proceed to prosecution because we have a confirmation hearing, first of all, and we have a number of live issues which we're litigating at the present moment in time. So I suggest we cross that bridge when we come to it.
Sir, would you know that if there's really a clear timeline regarding the adjudication of the motion for the interim release?
I would hope that within a month it would be decided. As I said, we've currently in the process of making our request for leave to reply. We hope to be able to reply to the prosecution's response to our request for interim release. And then the judges will rule. Under the Rome Statute, the judges are meant to rule on a request for interim release as speedily as possible.
Sir, in relation to that, many people in the Philippines were a bit confused with when you previously stated that the prosecution did not oppose your request for interim release, and then apparently the prosecution's response or written observation with respect to the interim release request is that they strongly oppose that. Can you clarify that? Attorney.
Once again, I stand by what I said. There was originally a non-opposition to interim release, but I'm not going to litigate the case now in the media. The case is a live issue, the matter is a live issue, before the court, and I'm not allowed to litigate it by
Thank
way
you,
of
sir.
social media.
Thank you, sir. There are reports claiming that Belgium and Australia declined to host former President Duterte during his interim release. What is the truth behind this?
Well, I don't know where Cristina Conti, because I guess that's who you're referring to, got that from. I'm not going to comment on any country. I'm not allowed to. These matters are confidential. But I assume that Cristina Conti, knowing the way that she thinks, has looked at the interim release agreements at the court and has decided that Belgium, because Belgium has signed an interim release treaty, is the destination or the proposed destination for President Duterte. I'm not going to comment on that. The same goes, by the way, for the Honourable Justice Minister or the Secretary for Justice in the Philippines, Mr. Remula,
Yes.
who's decided that there's a Latin American country that's prepared to receive President Duterte. Once again, I assume that he thinks we're talking about Argentina, because once again, Argentina has signed an interim release agreement with the International Criminal Court. I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay, sir. The Department of Justice in the Philippines reportedly sponsoring witnesses in the ICC case against the President Duterte because, as you mentioned, sir, all evidence related to the former chief executive's war on crime has already been destroyed. He mentioned that. What's your comment on that?
Sponsoring witnesses to cooperate or encouraging witnesses to cooperate, I don't know. We'll investigate that matter, and if it's true, then they will be cross-examined, those witnesses, in court, and these allegations will be put to them.
Sir, pertaining to the interim release, the annex terms and conditions, specifically paragraph 32, mentions that President Duterte will refrain from public engagement, holding office, and communicating with individuals outside his family. How does this affect the mandate given to him by the people of Davao as their newly elected mayor?
I look at the events in Davao and the elections as something else entirely. I view it as a vote of support for President Duterte, the former president, and I view it as a rejection of what was done to him by the current incumbent government. I don't view that as a mandate to rule Davao. Yes, of course, if he was released, then he would rule Davao, but he's not. He's sitting here in a prison. Physically, he's not able to govern at the present moment in time. It would be irresponsible for him, and he has told me that.
Okay. Are there already arrangements for his oath taking?
I'm not going to comment on that matter.
Okay. Who is exactly considered outside his family in the context of the interim release, sir?
Well, interim release, once again, is a matter which has to be decided, and also the scope of people who are in his family will also be decided.
Sir, could appeals or objections from civil society groups or international organizations influence the court's decision on the urgent interim release motion?
The victims have a right to make their voice heard, and they can comment on the application for interim release. And the court has already ordered the victims to make their observations known. They do that through a dedicated office in the court, which is called the OPCV, and the OPCV has responded.
Sir, in this particular question, should the Philippines is already a non-member state of the ICC to the Rome Statute, is it legally possible for it to voluntarily offer to host President Duterte during his interim release?
Even non-state parties can host persons who are on interim release from the International Criminal Court, should the court approve it. Obviously, we would want President Duterte to go back to the Philippines. But if I'm not mistaken, the government has already stated, point blank, that it's not prepared to receive him.
Will the public eventually be informed, sir, about which government or governments, if any, has expressed willingness to receive President Duterte should interim release be granted?
I anticipate that could be the case in due course, indeed.
Sir, this question is highly political. Has your meeting with Senator Amy Marcos had any direct or indirect bearing on President Duterte's case before the ICC? Or if you're able to share what was the nature of or the purpose of your meeting?
I'm able to share that. It was me who asked to see Senator Amy Marcos. I wanted to see her because I saw her in action in the committee hearings. I was impressed by what she had to say. I was impressed by the way she handled those hearings. And I was impressed also by the conclusions and the report that she produced. So I asked to meet her in order to receive that report. And I did.
Thank you, sir. Sir,
And by the way,
yes, go ahead.
that report hasn't been published on the Senate website. I wonder why.
Thank you, sir. Is it legally realistic for former President Duterte to seek any form of remedy or protection under Dutch domestic law while under the jurisdiction of ICC?
Well, I
Or
think I know where that
jurisdiction,
comes
sir.
from. There's some Filipino lawyer who suggested that he might be able to seek remedies under Dutch law. That's not the case.
Sir, the last question. Is it common for the office of the prosecutor to express no opposition to a motion such as the interim release? Or is this unusual and specific only to the President Duterte's case?
As I've said, in the past, it's possible in offences against justice cases. However, would be the first time if the prosecution do follow through on their original non-opposition, which was stated to me for one particular country. If they follow through on that, that would be the first time in an Article 5 case involving atrocity crimes or alleged atrocity crimes that the prosecution will express a non-opposition to interim release, yes.
Attorney Kaufman, do you have any message to the Filipino people who is closely following the development of the case of President Duterte?
Yes, I do. As I said, respect the judicial process. A lot of gossip, a lot of allegations have been made, especially by people like Attorney Cristina Conti, that the supporters of former President Duterte are threatening witnesses or trolling judges. That is simply not true.